Welcome to the Bryan Foltice Behavioral Finance Podcast, where we unravel the mysteries of behavioral finance and unlock the secrets to making smarter, more informed decisions with your money. Now, here's your host, Dr. Bryan Foltice.
Welcome, everybody, to the Bryan Foltice Behavioral Finance Podcast. It is me, Bryan Foltice, and thank you for listening wherever you are and whatever platform you are listening on. Today, I've got a bone to pick with what I thought was going to be just Dave Ramsey, but now it's also going back and forth between him and his bad advice that he's giving his listeners, also with some of the bad advice that financial advisors are also giving. So I'm realizing I'm finding myself in the middle of this conversation, and this conversation is about retirement withdrawal rates. This whole thing started with hopping on my feed and seeing that a lot of people were up in arms about Dave Ramsey talking about 8% withdrawal rates for retirement when he gave advice. And I didn't really care very much. But then I started going down the rabbit hole of what he was actually teaching, and it really perked my interest, and it perked my interest in a bad way. That's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. I've been pretty far removed from him and his teachings for a large number of years. He was very beneficial to me when I was in my 20s, getting out of debt and really focusing on building a different mindset of not being in debt, but also, saving and building up your emergency fund, and was super helpful. I'm always very grateful for that. I actually taught his financial peace classes in our church when I was in my 20s as well, and found it really exciting to help people get out of debt. At the same time, I also started seeing some trends on how people would fall back into their patterns of behavior, and always started to see some of the negative effects or some of the downside to the program. And it was usually a 13-week program. We would show up and reserve the credit union down the street and get people coming in. We had some big classes and some successes. And I couldn't help but notice, though, over time, everyone would get really fired up and start making progress. But then about a year later, many of the same people would show back up to the classes, and they were in a worse position than they were before. And so I started liking this to diets, where if you see somebody and they get really fired up about exercise and this plan, and back in when I was doing this, there was always this P90X, so 90 days, P90X, and people would get really fit and get really excited about fitness, and then they would, on day 91, they would stop. And they would get fatter and more out of shape, and then come back and get fired up and do P90X again. So I thought of this financial piece as P90X, where I go, okay, this is great and you're making progress. Day 91, what are you going to do? And how have we fully shifted behaviors? So you're going to notice that when I talk to people about finances and building your budget, we try to do more of a long-term approach. Is this a sustainable way of life? Because that's what we want to do with your money when we're budgeting this out. Yeah, we can get focused on knocking out your debt, and I want you to do that. But we also can build a little bit of slack in your budget, because life happens. There's a sustainable, it's just like going to the gym. When I'm in the gym, I don't need to set any records anymore, personal bests anymore. I'm 43 years old. However, I want to be back in the gym every day or every other day in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. And so anytime I walk in, I just go, hey, this is half the battle. I'm walking in. Anything I do inside the gym is going to be extra credit. And that's the same thing with our finances. Once we write down that budget, we get that down, you're in the gym. And whatever we do around that, we can just refine it. Anyway, that was one of my struggles. That was one of them. Next, the other struggle I had is once people did get out of debt, they didn't know what the hell to do with their money. And the framework that Ramsey has for building wealth had a lot to be desired, if I can just say that. There just wasn't a great framework besides some real loose retirement savings and then pay off your house and then give freely. That was, if I'm remembering the steps correctly, those were the frameworks in which you were to build your long-term wealth. And that's kind of where I left it. That's when I was out of debt. Go, no, I got to figure the rest out myself. There's not a lot here. All I know is I don't want to be showing back up here in worse shape than I was when I first walked in getting out of debt. And now that I'm revisiting this, and it all started with this 8% withdrawal rate, I'm realizing there is a large number of missteps that he's trying to make and build his advisor program. And he's also now really against financial advisors. And oh man, so this is just going to be one of the episodes. There are a couple other points I want to make around some of the assumptions that he's telling his audience that is dangerous and wrong, frankly. So, and he has a premise, and that's kind of this whole Barnum effect where you basically make a little premise based on some little shred of correctness, and then you tell your own story around it. So anyway, this is not about trying to bash. It's trying to stand in the middle between his debate with financial advisors and him being wrong. So this morning I was looking it up, and there was a call from somebody who was asking him, hey, my advisor said I should take out 4%. I've got all these different sources of income, including Social Security, 70 years old, great assets, and one part of his retirement portfolio wanted to take out 5% compared to 4%. So he and his wife, who was like 72 years old, could do extra travel. And so, of course, I'm looking at this and going, yes, this is 5% compared to 4%, and it's a small percentage. Market has been up for a while. Go take the 5%, and there's no problem with this. And that was more or less what he was saying, but then he kind of took it to another level and was calling the advisors this group of lemmings. So these followers, blind followers, in which I find ironic because I think the people who are surrounded by him on what I'm seeing are lemmings as well. Okay, Dave, or Dad, or I know it's kids are now involved, and whatever you say, Dad, 8%. And so, and then he's suggesting these actively traded mutual funds, which that sounds like 1995 all over again, almost 30 years of this is fossils, this actively traded mutual funds that are loaded. Oh my God, are you kidding me? And so I got pretty fired up. That's going to be on the next episode. 4% rate, where did this come from? And why do advisors use this? If you have $1 million saved, 4% withdrawal rate is going to be $40,000 that you can withdraw. And there's this Trinity study from 3 professors who did a simulation from Trinity University that showed a very high probability of success, essentially not running out of money over 20, 25 years, 30 years, based on historical market returns. And that's what advisors use because it's safe. And historically, if you have a 50-50, 50% bonds, 50% stock portfolio, you will have a historic 100% rate over 30 years, meaning you won't run out of money. And that's where these advisors really stick to that 4% rule. It's quite conservative, but it's assuring that based on different market conditions, you will not run out of money. On the other hand, this very conservative approach, especially in bull markets, it leads to what we now know as the retirement puzzle. And this is our findings that 60% of retirees pull out or withdraw less than their earnings made on their portfolio. This tells me that there's money left on the table most years if you are only pulling out 4% as your withdrawal rate. The rub on this, though, is if you are paying your financial advisor 1% of your assets under management, or whatever percentage that happens to be, there's a little bit of incompatibility with incentives. And I think from an advisor standpoint, they have real reason to keep you on that conservative path, because if you are on that trajectory to literally hit your last dollar on your dying breath, as which, all of our financial models in the academic world like to show you, that's how we should do rationally, that's not going to make a lot of money for your advisor, because your last years on earth, if they're taking a percentage, that's not going to be very much. That's, as a consumer, what you want to know, is that their compatibility with incentives is not always going to be in line with you, the retiree. And I think that's what Ramsey's gripe is. And he's trying to pit, but then his alternative is so flawed that we're going to talk about that as well, and then conclude with a middle ground here in the middle. So he'll take, when Ramsey's talking about this withdrawal rate, he is using 8%, and he's very confident in an 8% withdrawal rate, which from a sales standpoint sounds very, very simple. He's essentially telling you, hey, if you want $80,000 in annual income, use my advisors and you only need $1 million saved to have that. If you go to everybody else, you're going to need $2 million saved up in order to have that same $80,000, as if he has this secret sauce of this 8%. And then what he wants to do is he starts janking around with the assumptions here. First assumption is that he wants you in 100% stocks in retirement. Now, obviously, stocks perform historically the best over time, and having you in this will, on average, give you the largest returns. No gripes there. But what is completely dismissed is any risk and volatility from those returns. And this is finance 101. We've got to talk about risk, especially when we're talking about retirement income. And then what he does, he was pressed, so he pulled up a spreadsheet and said, look, I can give you 12% returns. And he just goes down 12%, 12%, 12%, 12%. And I'm going to take out 4% for inflation to give a real return of 8%. And then if we have that 8% withdrawal rate, it washes out. and then he's talking about other financial advisors being lemmings. No, people, if you're listening to this show, I'm assuming that we're thinking about these things and we're trying to be more informed. And so that's where I go, okay, if we had those returns in that sequence, 8% all day, we have no reason to have this episode. However, there's one thing, here's the term that you're going to learn today. It's called sequence risk, or sequence of return risk, otherwise known as sequence risk. And this is the danger that the timing of withdrawals from a retirement account will damage the investor's overall returns and overall outcome. What does that mean? Sequence of returns. And this is where we often overlook when we, especially when we're in retirement. And that's where I tell my students, when we're in your 20s, if the market goes down by 40%, that's fine. I'm going to buy every stock at a 40% discount, and my money will go further. And over time, we'll go through the ups and downs. But when I am using that amount to get my income for retirement, I don't have the capacity, for the most part, to ride those ups and downs. And so I use this as a great excuse to build my own little spreadsheet, and then also realize that there are some really good resources that have updated the simulation of the Trinity study based on long-term historical data and inflation all the way back to 1871. So I'll post that link in the description as well. It's really fascinating, and it does show, by the way, that the 8% withdrawal rate will give you about a 50 to 60% chance of success. And I don't think Uncle Dave is talking about the probability of success when he's giving his 8% withdrawal rate. Sequence risk, though, when I was building this model, you can actually see, based on some of the assumptions and distributions that you make, there's a wide variety of outcomes based on when these down markets happen, when you have negative returns. So the baseline assumption, or the baseline rules that I was making here, was $1 million in your portfolio, 8%, which gives you $80,000 income each year. And one of the simulations, you run it out, yeah, you're great. It's going to be $3 million after 30 years, no problem. Then the very next one, which I found interesting, was year one had a 37.5% negative return, which gave you, at the end of 1 year, minus the income coming out, just over $500,000. So $545,000 and some change, minus the $80,000 coming out. In years 2 through 9, there was an average return of 11.36% per year. Nevertheless, you're still taking $80,000 out of that, now just over $500,000. In year 10, we lost another 26%, and that took your $251,000 all the way down after your $80,000 withdrawal down to $106,000. And then after that, because you're taking $80,000 a year, you only made it to year 12 before you spent your last dollar. Sequence risk, what that means is if you have a couple of bad years right up front and you don't change that 8%, if it's a fixed income that you need, that $80,000 per year, you're out of money in year 12 based off of some pretty reasonable assumptions. And I'll post the spreadsheet online so you can mess around with some of the numbers and just run a number of simulations and just see how it all plays out. And what it shows, though, is this is a very dangerous strategy. And this really sometimes can really undershoot. And this is why people have the retirement puzzle, because we're all deathly afraid of running out of money before we die. That's why we saved so prudently our entire lives. And this 8% withdrawal rate, when you're all in stocks and have no diversification, this can be a very dangerous thing. And so that's where I'm saying, all right, financial advisors, you are way too conservative with that 4% for the most part, and you have very low compatibility with your incentives to get people to do the rational amount to come out. Ramsey, on the other hand, is way too aggressive and borders dangerous, especially when you start using terrible assumptions that seem to be outdated at best and dangerous and totally misleading at worst. In conclusion, if we know we have these two camps, what is the middle ground on this? And this is what I was toying with a little bit in the spreadsheet. And I thought to myself, what if we categorize, we say we're not supposed to categorize money because it's all the same. But if I'm thinking about my retirement from a spending standpoint, and I've done everything right, I wonder if there's a way to categorize my essentials. So things that I know I'm going to need to pay for, I want some assurance on that, where I'm going to have a low percentage withdrawal rate on a certain amount because I want to know that my housing is taken care of, my long-term insurance or my long-term care is going to be taken care of. Some of these categories and aspects, I don't want volatility around. I don't want to risk it. On the other hand, I think there should be some elasticity or flexibility around the withdrawal rate. So when we talk about this call, yeah, the market's been up. I want to change my retirement withdrawal rate to 5% so I can travel. Do it. Go while you still have your health and energy to do that. And just if we have some flexibility, even if we updated our withdrawal rate a little bit year over year or cut back when the market goes down, we would really increase our probabilities of success, of still having money at the end of your retirement. And this is where I feel like we can meet in the middle, is that there are no hard and fast rules between these two numbers. But if we have a little bit of flexibility around that, I'm going to keep a certain amount conservative at a conservative number, and I'm going to have flexibility on this other part that I know can change depending on how my retirement portfolio is doing. That's where I want to leave it. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about geometric returns compared to average returns, which may not sound interesting, but definitely need to be addressed. And then we're also going to look at expenses and fees. And that's going to be our part 2 of, what did I write on my paper here? Dave Makes Me Mad, part 1. Yeah, that's going to be part 2. And I'm not mad. I just find it really interesting. And I know that he has a really big audience and he's helped a lot of people. And I don't want to dismiss that. And it sounds like he is pretty pompous about that now, which kind of rubs me the wrong way, unfortunately. But I also want to point out the flaws here and try to make people a little bit more educated around some of the good advice and then also some advice that's bad and be able to hopefully articulate why it's bad. If you found this interesting, I would be very grateful for a comment or review. Those really help the algorithm nudge more people into listening and hopefully finding this helpful and insightful. And if you also have any questions or need anything from me, I am always happy to assist. You can find me on Instagram now, Dr. Bryan Foltice, on YouTube, on Facebook now. I think I'm on TikTok too. Yeah, Dr. Bryan Foltice. BryanFoltice.com, BryanFoltice.com. And I hope to hear from you soon. Also, if you have any ideas for new episodes, I am also all ears. Would love to hear from you. I know the audience is growing, and I'm happy to see that, but also want to serve you in whatever way benefits you the most. So let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Bryan Foltice Behavioral Finance Podcast. We hope you found our exploration into the fascinating world of human behavior and finance both enlightening and thought-provoking. Be sure to subscribe for future episodes. And until next time, stay curious and financially savvy.